Well, it's Blue Monday, the statistically most depressing day of the year. What fun. This is one of those made-up holidays, the third Monday of every January, that is said to be the most depressing day of the year by some combination between the end of the holiday season, the wearing off of the Christmas break joy, the taking down of Christmas lights, the bleak weather, the lack of sunlight, all that sort of stuff comes together to make a pretty depressing kind of time. And yeah, I would generally say this is about my most, on average, depressing time of the year. Certain exceptions apply, but by and large, yeah. Thing is, though, I'm actually depressed most of the time, actually. I I suffer depression. I've always suffered depression for as long as I can possibly remember. And there's never really been a time in my life when I haven't been depressed. I mean, there's been periods where I've been less depressed, times when I've felt okay, and even days and moments when I felt actually just great, but the depression's just always been there. I should probably talk about what depression really is and what it really means. For one, it's not just being sad. It's just not just mopiness. It's not just that feeling of sadness that comes from losing a loved one or being disappointed or something like that. It's much more of an all-encompassing sensation, and it's actually less a feeling and more of a lack of feeling, a numbness. It feels different for everybody, but for me, it's just this emptiness, this combination between sadness and boredom that persists regardless of what other feelings are there. If I'm in a happy situation, there'll be still this undermining blech underneath, and if I'm in a lonely situation or a sad situation altogether, it can be even worse. But by and large, it's basically just a numb sensation, a lack of feeling rather than anything distinct. And this can cause a certain amount of paralysis. I often spend long periods of time where I just can't do anything. I'll lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I'll be staring at my phone, doom scrolling for hours on end. You can usually gauge my level of depression by looking at my kitchen. If there's a pile of dishes a mile high, it's a pretty good chance my depression's pretty bad at the moment. And, well, right now it's all right. It's been generally okay the last couple of weeks, but the last few days have been kind of rough. One of the hardest things about depression is how indistinct it is. There's no clear boundaries, there's no clear diagnosis, really, for what depression feels like. It's often thought of in terms of like a brain chemistry imbalance or something like that, but that's only half of the story. It goes deeper than that, because yes, the brain chemistry is a little odd, and that's why I feel the way that I do, but it's not just caused by brain chemistry. When someone doesn't understand, this usually ends up in some conversation about, oh, just do X, Y, Z, and you'll feel much better. Wow, thanks, I'm cured. If only I had thought about that. Have you tried not being depressed, basically? None of it really makes sense. And it's born on this false definition of depression as being just sadness or just a brain chemistry imbalance. But it is, as I say, much deeper than that. I take a series of drugs, and I've tried a series of drugs over the course of my life, and some of it helps. I'll give you that. I've been on a drug called lamotrigine for, I'd say, almost 15 years now, and it's been pretty life-alteringly positive influence. I have a very strong mood dynamic, otherwise known as bipolar mood disorder. But it basically what this drug does is it just calms everything down. It lowers the dynamic between the extreme highs and the extreme lows, and reduces, as a result, the chance of an extreme switch or a mixed mood state. And it makes it a lot easier just to be in the moment, be in my stable space. But it doesn't exactly make the depression go away. It just makes things easier to deal with. When I'm in a particularly bad space, I'll sometimes go on a course of antidepressants. I've tried the SSRIs, a series of them, and right now I'm taking Wellbutrin, which it's doing a thing. It's a nice drug. It's certainly not for everybody because it does increase the chance of seizures, but I'm not prone to those, so that's kind of nice. And it's been enough to be able to drag me out of probably my worst depression of my life. This whole pandemic thing, the social isolation that comes along with quarantining, and, well, the self-destructiveness of my educational career has not been very kind to me. And so with the help of this drug, I've been able to at least drag my ass out of it. My dishes have been getting done. I've been doing these videos, which has been nice. But I still slip here and there. And what's really dangerous about depression is that it sneaks up on you. You can feel like it's okay. You can feel like you're doing fine. And then you start noticing things like, oh, I didn't do the dishes yesterday, did I? Oh, I don't actually want to go out, do I? Oh, I've actually been depressed for several days. And you don't really notice it until you're already there. And oftentimes when I've been in a really bad place and then it finally lifts for one reason or another, it's only when I'm out of it that I recognize just how bad it was, just how awful I had let myself become. Part of the danger of this sneakiness is that the behaviors and the motivations that go along with being depressed creep out before I'm able to recognize what's happening. I sabotage relationships. I self-sabotage my own behaviors. I've screwed up my education by being depressed, not recognizing it, not dealing with it, and then allowing things to lapse. I've screwed up romantic relationships with people just by allowing myself to slide into this awful space, feeling bad on the inside, and then trying to find some way to explain it on the outside, and then taking it out on the nearest person to me, whether that be a close friend or a romantic partner or a family member or even my cats sometimes. It's profoundly toxic to be depressed. When I suddenly snap out of a lengthy or really severe depression, I'll notice where it is in my body. Like I'll have depressed neck, where I've been doing a lot of this, or I've been doing a lot of this. And when I snap out of it and I'm not feeling depressed and I'm not doing this, all the muscles that keep me in decent posture are sore and under-exercised. And it like lives in my body. The problem with thinking about it as a chemical imbalance is that the treatments for it are purely medical as a result, which doesn't really work. It's not just a chemical imbalance. It requires a more holistic view. There are psychological reasons that lead to the depression and also that result from the depression, and these things need to be addressed as well. The value of therapy is in analyzing the way that you think and the way that that generates depression and keeps you in depression and keeps your behavior in such a way that creates more and more depression. That's not to say that the depressed person is blamed for their own illness by their behavior or by their thinking strategies. More so that it's comorbid with the chemical condition that's also being brought on by this. On the other hand, it's also not purely a matter of psychology. There is also a situational aspect to depression. When you're in a depressing situation, or if you're living, well, frankly, a depressing world, it's much more difficult to not feel depressed. I've always been a sensitive person. I tend to be quite empathetic. I tend to take on the hurts of others quite easily, and that even applies to the world at large. And I tend to be a very well-informed person as well. I pay attention to what's going on in the world and pay attention to the situation generally. And what I see is not always fun to know, especially the environment, especially looking at how quickly we've destroyed this planet and how quickly things are crumbling. The oceans are basically beyond repair at this point. The ocean ecosystem is collapsing very rapidly. There won't be coral reefs in another few decades. The rainforest is being paved over effectively. My local ecosystem is collapsing as I'm watching it. And that's pretty sad to see, because I love nature. I love being out in nature. And when I'm feeling particularly sad or depressed, I'll go out into the forest, and by and large, it makes me feel better. But when I go out in the forest and see what used to be my favorite meadow being plowed over for a subdivision, that doesn't feel good. It doesn't have the same effect as it would if it was the meadow itself. And yeah, I mean, maybe I'm just being sentimental about these things, but there is a value to nature, a survival value. If we don't maintain the ecosystem, we're all gonna die. And that makes me very depressed to know that we're actively destroying the ecosystem. I guess what I'm trying to say is that if you're not depressed, you're probably not paying attention. Or if you are paying attention, I would like to know how you're not depressed. I've been working on it. I've been doing really well. I've built a series of psychological techniques to sustain myself in depressing situations, and I have ways of compartmentalizing it away. I'm not constantly fretting. I'm not constantly thinking about it and making myself depressed, but it does creep in, and I'm sitting on this backdrop of a depressing world. Like when I drive down the street or go walking around downtown and I see just so much misery, so much just hurt and neglect and fear and anger of the people that are at the bottom of the ladder of the society, it's hard to handle. It's hard to take. And it would probably make me feel better if I could do something about it, but there's also this helplessness that comes along with this. Knowing that there are so many people that are hurting so bad, so much about the world that is in trouble, and there's just fucking nothing I can do. And even the leaders, they don't do anything either. Even if they could do something, they don't do anything. And I don't have great hopes. So yeah, you can throw as much antidepressants at me as you want. And you can throw as much good feelings and psychological manipulations as you possibly can at me. And I don't think it would ever really make the depression go away. I'm living in a world that's depressing. It's only natural that I'd be depressed. I wish that it weren't so. Depression isn't a psychological problem. It's not a purely psychological problem. It's a social problem. It's a societal illness. One that can't be treated by treating the individual alone. It's something that we need to treat the world with. We need our society to stop being so depressed in order for me as an individual or you as an individual to be not depressed. If we lived in a less depressing world, or a world that didn't intentionally generate depression as a way to sell things, then it would be a lot easier to not feel that way. So much of our current economic structure relies on persistent and pervasive depression. You turn on the TV, you look at the advertisements, and it's all these happy people dancing around in these contrived social situations that clearly aren't real, but the underlying message of the advertisement is, if you buy this product, you'll feel this happy. All the ugh in your world will go away if you drink this beer or buy this cosmetic product or go on this vacation or anything else like that. But really, it's all an illusion. It's all just meant there to be the carrot dangling in front of your face. It should be remembered that human psychology isn't really meant for happiness. It's not meant for, like, continuous satisfaction, because otherwise we wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. We'd just be slothfully satisfied all the time. It's actually a survival strategy that we're not easily satisfied. But there ought to be a way to structure a life in which enough satisfaction is present that we're not constantly feeling mopey. What does the ideal society look like? It's one in which we're all well cared for. One in which we don't have to feel such anguish about the generalized other, because the generalized other is being treated well. It's one in which we're not staring down the barrel of an existential disaster, where the environment isn't on the verge of collapse all the time. One where there's some trajectory towards a positive future, something to hope for, something to look forward to. I should hope that we can achieve that. I hope that we pull out of this tailspin and start working towards this more bright and happy future, and maybe I can live to see the day when the world is actually okay on a regular basis. It's not enough for me not to be depressed. It's that the world needs to stop being so depressed. I've got much more to say about this, but I'll cut it off for today. Tomorrow I think I'll revisit this as a more in-depth look at the way that psychiatry has treated depression and turned it into something that it's not. Anyway, I do this daily, so if you enjoy my content, check back again tomorrow and subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you would. It helps out the channel. And share it with your friends if you possibly could. I would appreciate it. And so I'll see you tomorrow.